An ex-con rescued an abandoned baby, never suspecting it would lead to his exoneration. Marcus Reeves stood at the edge of the empty bus stop, rain pelting his worn denim jacket as he clutched the meager possessions that 6 years in Westlake Correctional had allowed him to accumulate. The world felt too big now, too loud, too fast, too indifferent to a man whose name had been reduced to an inmate number for a crime he never committed. The apartment complex loomed before him like a fortress of judgment. Third floor, Unit 308. His parole officer had arranged it. "Best I could do for someone with your record," she'd said, not unkindly. Marcus understood. Nobody wanted an ex-con convicted of armed robbery living next door, especially not one whose protests of innocence had fallen on deaf ears. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, as if the apartment itself was hesitant to welcome him. Inside, bare walls and minimal furniture greeted him. A sagging couch, a rickety table, a bed with sheets that smelled of industrial detergent. But it was his. For now. "Home sweet home," Marcus whispered, his deep voice cracking slightly from disuse. The words hung in the air, unanswered. Sleep came fitfully that first night. Memories of steel bars and shouted commands infiltrating his dreams. When dawn finally broke, Marcus stood at the window watching the neighborhood come to life. People hurrying to jobs, children with backpacks, a normal life that felt as foreign to him as another country. The parole-approved job at Wilson's Auto Shop started Monday. 3 days to acclimate to freedom. 3 days to remember how to exist in a world that had continued without him. Marcus walked the neighborhood that afternoon, memorizing streets, noting the suspicious glances from mothers who pulled their children closer as he passed. He'd expected it, but the sting remained sharp. At the corner market, the cashier watched his hands constantly, as if expecting them to reach for a weapon instead of his wallet. "Receipt," Marcus said quietly when the transaction was complete, knowing he needed proof of every purchase. The cashier slid it across the counter, careful not to let their fingers touch. By the third day, a routine had formed. Wake at 5 a.m., same as in prison. Exercise in the confined space of his living room. Eat a simple breakfast. Walk the neighborhood, expanding his radius each time. Return to the apartment. Watch the clock tick away hours that stretched endlessly. Sunday evening brought a chill that seeped through the building's thin walls. Marcus wrapped himself in the single blanket provided by the halfway house program and tried to prepare mentally for his first day of work tomorrow. The sound came just as he was drifting off, so faint he thought he'd imagined it. A whimper, then a weak cry. Marcus sat up, listening. Nothing but the distant hum of traffic and the occasional door closing in the building. He lay back down, pulling the blanket tighter. There it was again, a tiny distress sound. He moved to the window, peering down at the narrow alley between his building and the next. The security light cast just enough glow to reveal a large cardboard box propped against the dumpster. The sound came again, unmistakable now. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew he should call someone. Police, social services. But the thought of blue uniforms appearing on his doorstep 3 days after release made his blood run cold. Still, that cry. Before he could reconsider, Marcus was pulling on his jacket, taking the stairs 2 at a time, emerging into the cold night air. The alley smelled of garbage and rainwater, the puddles reflecting shattered pieces of the streetlights above. The box sat innocuously beside the dumpster, slightly damp from the earlier rain. As Marcus approached, the crying stopped, as if whatever was inside was holding its breath. With trembling fingers, he pulled back the folded flaps of cardboard. E-baby, tiny, red-faced, wrapped hastily in what looked like a woman's sweater. Impossibly small hands balled into angry fists, eyes squeezed shut in protest against the world that had abandoned it. Abandoned her, Marcus realized, noting the pink onesie visible beneath the sweater. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice strange to his own ears. The baby's eyes flew open at the sound. Dark, intense eyes that seemed to look straight through Marcus's carefully constructed walls. Her crying paused momentarily as they regarded each other, the ex-convict and the abandoned infant. Two souls cast aside by a world that had no place for them. "I can't," Marcus said to no one in particular. "I can't get involved." But even as the words left his mouth, he was gathering the box carefully into his arms, feeling the slight weight of the child inside shift. The baby's cry grew more insistent now, a demand for attention, for care, for the most basic human need, connection. The stairwell had never seemed so long. With each step, Marcus rehearsed what he would say when he called the authorities. With each step, he felt the weight of his record, his history, the assumptions that would immediately be made about a man like him with a baby that wasn't his. Back in his apartment, Marcus placed the box on the kitchen table and finally, properly, looked at the child. She was tiny, newborn or close to it. Her skin was pale with a hint of jaundice, her dark hair matted to her head. She wore only the thin onesie and the makeshift sweater blanket, both damp from the night air. Marcus's hands that had learned to fight in juvenile detention, hands that had been cuffed and fingerprinted and searched, felt impossibly large and rough as he carefully lifted the infant from the box. She weighed almost nothing, a fragile collection of bones and new life that fit in the crook of his arm, as if designed to be there. "I don't know what to do with you," he confessed as the baby continued to cry. "But I'm going to call for help, okay? Just hang on." The baby responded by crying harder, tiny face contorted in need. Food. The baby needed food, and dry clothes, and warmth. The realization of how ill-equipped he was hit Marcus like a physical blow. His phone, the basic flip model provided by the re-entry program, seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds as he reached for it. One call and his tentative freedom could evaporate. One call and he would become the ex-con who had a baby in his apartment. The suspicion would be immediate, the benefit of the doubt non-existent. As his thumb hovered over the keypad, the baby's cries subsided into hiccuping sobs. Marcus looked down to find those dark eyes open again, staring up at him with an expression that seemed impossibly knowing for one so new to the world. "What happened to you, little one?" he murmured. "Who left you out there?" The sweater wrapped around the baby was expensive. Cashmere, Marcus thought, remembering his mother's prized sweater that she wore only to church. And there, embroidered on the corner in delicate thread, were initials, AMG. Something else caught his eye. A folded piece of paper tucked into the side of the box. Carefully cradling the baby in one arm, Marcus retrieved it with his free hand. The note was brief, written in shaky handwriting. "Her name is Hope. I can't keep her safe. He'll hurt her like he hurt me. Please help her." No signature. No explanation of who he was. Just a plea that twisted something deep in Marcus's chest. "Hope," he whispered to the baby, testing the name. Her eyes seemed to focus on his face for a moment, and his throat tightened unexpectedly. The right thing to do was clear. Call 911, explain, hand over the baby, return to his empty apartment in his parole-approved job, and his attempt to rebuild a life from the ashes of wrongful conviction. Instead, Marcus found himself warming a dishcloth under the faucet, gently cleaning the baby's face. Instead, he found himself cutting up his only clean t-shirt to fashion a makeshift diaper. Instead, he found himself bundling her more securely, holding her against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "First thing tomorrow," he promised himself aloud. "First thing tomorrow, I'll call. But tonight, you're staying warm and safe." Hope's tiny fingers wrapped around his calloused thumb with surprising strength, and something inside Marcus, something he thought had died during those 6 years behind bars, stirred to life. Monday morning arrived with harsh reality. Marcus had spent the night alternating between awkward attempts to comfort the increasingly hungry baby and anxious planning. He couldn't show up to his first day of work with an infant. He couldn't keep a baby in his apartment, and he certainly couldn't explain this situation without raising every red flag in the system. Hope had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep just before dawn, her tiny body curled against his chest as he sat propped against the wall, afraid to move and disturb her fragile peace. The corner store opened at 6 a.m. With Hope carefully wrapped in his jacket, held close to his body to shield her from view, Marcus purchased formula, diapers, and a baby bottle, ignoring the cashier's raised eyebrows at his selections. "Sister's kid," he mumbled when the man's stare lingered too long. Babysitting. Back in the apartment, with Hope fed and changed, Marcus made the call, not to 911, but to his parole officer, Angela Waters. "I can't come in today," he said when she answered, the words rushing out before he could reconsider. "There's been a situation. I need to handle something." The silence on the other end of the line stretched thin. "Mr. Reeves, you understand that attending your first day of employment is a condition of your parole." Her voice was professional, clipped. "If you fail to comply..." "I found a baby," Marcus interrupted, the words hanging between them. "Last night, abandoned. In a box." Another silence, longer this time. "Mr. Reeves, if this is some kind of..." "I'm not lying." He looked down at Hope, now sleeping peacefully on his bed, surrounded by pillows to prevent her from rolling. "Someone left a newborn by the dumpster behind my building." I heard her crying. There was a note, said her name is Hope, and that someone would hurt her. Angela's sigh carried through the phone, a mixture of frustration and resignation. Have you called the police? No. The admission felt heavy. I was afraid they'd think I had something to do with it. The truth of his fear hung in the air between them. Both knew the reality. A black ex-con with a record, found with an abandoned baby, would face questions no one else would. I'm coming over, Angela said finally. Don't go anywhere. Don't do anything. Just wait for me. The 30 minutes until Angela's arrival stretched endlessly. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, watching Hope sleep, wondering about the mother who had been desperate enough to leave her child, yet caring enough to wrap her warmly and name her Hope. Angela Waters was younger than most parole officers, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for being tough but fair. She'd been assigned to Marcus's case 2 weeks before his release, replacing a retiring officer who had left nothing but a thin file and a warning that this one still claims he's innocent. When she knocked 3 short authoritative raps, Marcus felt his stomach clench. He opened the door to find her standing there in a gray pantsuit, her expression carefully neutral. Where is she? Angela asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Marcus led her to the bedroom, where Hope had just begun to stir, tiny fists waving in the air. Angela's professional demeanor softened visibly as she approached the baby. Oh, she breathed more to herself than to Marcus. She's so small. Found her last night, Marcus said, keeping his distance, acutely aware of how the scene might appear. In a box by the dumpster. I heard her crying from my window. Angela gently unwrapped the blanket, checking the baby with practiced movements that told Marcus this wasn't her first encounter with an abandoned infant. Hope protested with a whimper that quickly built toward a full cry. She's hungry again, Marcus said, moving to the kitchen. I got formula this morning. Angela followed him, watching as he prepared the bottle with careful precision, testing the temperature on his wrist just as he'd seen his sister do with her children years ago, before his conviction had severed all family ties. You've done this before, she observed. My sister had kids, he said simply, returning to Hope and gathering her carefully into his arms. The baby latched onto the bottle instantly, her earlier cries forgotten. Angela watched the scene, her expression unreadable. You know we need to call Child Protective Services. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In less than 24 hours, this tiny human had somehow breached walls he'd spent years constructing. I'll make the call, Angela continued, her voice gentler than he'd ever heard it. I'll explain how you found her. That you did the right thing by contacting me. Relief washed over Marcus, followed immediately by an unexpected pang at the thought of Hope being taken away. What will happen to her? He asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. She'll be placed in emergency foster care while they try to locate the mother. Angela was watching him with an odd expression. You really care what happens to her, don't you? Marcus looked down at Hope, at the tiny hand that had once again found his thumb. Somebody should. Angela's phone call to CPS was brief and professional. When she hung up, she turned to Marcus with a slight frown. They're sending someone, but it might be a few hours. They're dealing with a situation across town. I'll stay with her, Marcus said quickly. What about your job? Angela reminded him. Wilson's won't hold the position if you don't show today. Marcus looked from Hope to Angela, the impossible choice clear on his face. Angela checked her watch, then sighed deeply. I can stay for an hour. You go to Wilson's, explain you had an emergency, but you're there now. Put in at least half a day, then come back here. I'll tell CPS there was a miscommunication about the address to buy you some time. The offer shocked Marcus into silence. Angela Waters, by the book parole officer, was suggesting he bend the rules. Why would you do that? He finally asked. Angela's gaze dropped to Hope, then back to Marcus. Because in 6 years of working with parolees, I've never seen one risk his freedom to help someone else. That means something to me. She gestured toward the door. Now go before I change my mind. Marcus's first day at Wilson's auto shop passed in a blur of introductions, paperwork, and basic tasks assigned to test his knowledge. Jim Wilson, the owner, was a gruff man in his 60s who spoke little, but watched everything. He had hired Marcus only as a favor to a prison ministry program he supported, a fact he made abundantly clear. You're on probation here, same as with the state, he'd said during their brief orientation. One mistake, one problem, you're done. By the time Marcus's half-day was complete, his mind was consumed with thoughts of hope. He practically ran the 6 blocks back to his apartment, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Angela opened the door before he could insert his key, her finger pressed to her lips. Just got her to sleep, she whispered. The living room had been transformed. A social worker, a tired-looking woman named Diane, sat on his couch, a folder open on her lap. Beside her was a portable bassinet that certainly hadn't been there this morning. "Mr. Reeves," Diane said, rising to shake his hand. "Mary Yaresh, Waters has explained the situation. We appreciate you taking care of the infant overnight." Marcus nodded, his eyes drawn to the bassinet where Hope slept peacefully. "We have a placement ready for her," Diane continued. "But there are some questions we need to address first. The note you found, may I see it?" Marcus retrieved the note from where he'd placed it on the kitchen counter. Diane read it, her lips pursing slightly. "And the clothing she was wearing." Angela produced the pink onesie and cashmere sweater from a plastic bag. "I've documented everything," she explained to Marcus. "Standard procedure." Diane examined the sweater carefully, noting the embroidered initials. "Amgri," she read aloud. "This could help identify the mother." She looked up at Marcus. "Did you see anyone near the area last night? Hear anything besides the baby crying?" Marcus shook his head. "It was quiet. Raining earlier. I just heard her cry and found the box." Diane made notes in her file. "We'll need to file a police report, of course. There will be an investigation to locate the mother." The word police sent a familiar tension through Marcus's shoulders. Angela, noticing, stepped in smoothly. "I've already spoken with Detective Morales about the situation," she said. "He'll be handling the case personally." Marcus shot her a grateful look. Detective Morales was one of the few officers who had expressed doubts about Marcus's conviction years ago. Diane closed her folder. "Well, everything seems in order. I'll just take the baby now and—" "Actually," Angela interrupted, "there's been a slight complication." Both Marcus and Diane turned to her in surprise. "The emergency placement fell through about 20 minutes ago," Angela continued. "The foster parent had a family emergency." Diane was just explaining that finding another suitable placement on short notice might be challenging. Diane nodded, though she looked slightly confused. "Yes, especially for a newborn. We may need to use the group home temporarily, although it's not ideal for an infant." "A group home?" Marcus echoed, the words conjuring memories of his own time in such facilities as a teenager. "Overcrowded, understaffed, cold. Just until we can find a proper foster placement," Diane assured him, though her voice lacked conviction. "What if," Angela said carefully, "we considered a temporary emergency placement right here?" The room went silent. Marcus stared at Angela, certain he had misheard. "Mr. Reeves is a parolee," Diane pointed out, stating the obvious. "That automatically disqualifies him from fostering." "Not necessarily," Angela countered. "There are provisions for emergency kinship care that can bypass some requirements. While Mr. Reeves isn't related to the child, he is the one who rescued her and has already demonstrated appropriate care." "Miss Waters, with all due respect—" "3 days," Angela pressed. "Give me 3 days to find a suitable foster family through my church network. People I can personally vouch for. In the meantime, I'll take full responsibility for daily check-ins here." Marcus found his voice at last. "I don't understand." "Why would you suggest this?" Angela met his gaze steadily. "Because sometimes the system fails the very people it's meant to protect. I've seen too many children shuffled through emergency placements. Hope deserves better than that." She turned back to Diane. "I'm willing to put my professional reputation on the line for this temporary arrangement." Diane looked between them, clearly conflicted. "This is highly irregular. So is an ex-con risking his parole to save an abandoned baby," Angela replied softly. The social worker sighed, then opened her folder again. 3 days, she finally conceded, with daily visits from both me and Miss Waters, and a full home safety check right now. The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as Diane examined every inch of Marcus's sparse apartment, listing requirements that would need to be met. Outlet covers, a proper crib, child-proofing for cabinets. Angela took notes, promising to return that evening with the necessary supplies. When Diane finally left, after demonstrating proper feeding and bathing techniques and leaving her cell number for emergencies only, Marcus sank onto the couch in disbelief. "Why did you do that?" he asked Angela, who was gathering her things to leave. She paused, considering her answer carefully. 6 years ago, a young man was convicted of armed robbery based on eyewitness testimony and circumstantial evidence. He maintained his innocence through sentencing, through appeals, through 6 years of incarceration. Marcus stiffened. "You read my file." "I read between the lines of your file," Angela corrected. "And I requested the original case notes. There were inconsistencies that should have been investigated further." Hope stirred in her bassinet, and Marcus automatically moved to check on her. "I can't reopen your case," Angela continued, watching him gently adjust the baby's blanket. "That's not within my power, but I can recognize a man who deserves a second chance when I see one." She moved toward the door. "I'll be back in a few hours with supplies. Try to get some rest while she's sleeping. You look like you need it." After she left, Marcus stood in the center of his apartment, the reality of his situation slowly sinking in. He, Marcus Reeves, ex-convict, was now temporarily responsible for a newborn baby. Hope chose that moment to wake, her cries instantly filling the small space. As Marcus lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest where she immediately quieted, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 long years. Purpose. 3 days turned into a week. Angela had found a potential foster family, but they were still completing the certification process. Diane, initially skeptical, had been surprised by Marcus's dedication and natural instinct with hope. His apartment had been transformed with the necessities of infant care. A proper crib, changing table, rocking chair, and more formula and diapers than seemed possible for one tiny human to need. Jim Wilson, after a visit from Angela, had agreed to adjust Marcus's schedule to part-time evening shifts when Angela could watch Hope. The arrangement was temporary, everyone emphasized, just until a proper placement was found. But as each day passed, the bond between Marcus and Hope deepened. He learned to distinguish her cries. Hunger different from discomfort, discomfort different from loneliness. He discovered that she slept best when held against his chest, her tiny head tucked under his chin. He found himself talking to her constantly, telling her stories about his mother, his childhood before everything went wrong, his dreams for a future he'd stopped believing was possible. It was during one such evening, as Marcus rocked Hope after her bath, that the knock came, sharp, authoritative, nothing like Angela's usual pattern. Marcus opened the door to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway. His body tensed automatically, years of conditioned response impossible to override. "Marcus Reeves?" the older officer asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir." Marcus shifted Hope slightly, protective. "I'm Detective Hayes, this is Officer Collins. We need to ask you some questions about the abandoned infant you reported." Marcus stepped back, allowing them entry, every nerve on high alert. "My parole officer and the social worker have all the information. I found her by the dumpster last Sunday night." Detective Hayes' eyes scanned the apartment, taking in the baby supplies, the carefully organized space. "We've been investigating several reports of missing infants in the area. May I?" He gestured toward Hope. Reluctantly, Marcus allowed the detective to look at the baby, though he didn't relinquish his hold on her. "The sweater she was found in," Hayes continued, "cashmere with the initials AMG. We've identified its owner, Amelia Grace." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but he nodded for the detective to continue. "Mrs. Grace reported her sweater stolen from her vehicle 3 weeks ago. Along with her purse and phone." Hayes was watching Marcus carefully. "Her car was parked outside Westlake Memorial Hospital, where she works as a nurse." Marcus frowned, not understanding the significance. "Okay, so someone stole the sweater and later used it to wrap Hope. What does that have to do with me?" "Westlake Memorial is 6 blocks from the convenience store where you were allegedly robbing the cashier 6 years ago." The connection, when it hit, left Marcus breathless. "You think the person who stole her sweater is connected to my case?" "We're exploring all possibilities," Hayes said neutrally. "The robbery you were convicted of occurred at 11:42 p.m. Miss Grace's vehicle was broken into approximately 1 hour earlier, according to security footage we've recently reviewed." Marcus's mind raced. His public defender had been overworked, the trial rushed. The only evidence against him had been the cashier's identification and his previous juvenile record. No weapon had ever been found. No stolen money recovered. "The man in the security footage," Marcus said slowly. "What did he look like?" Hayes exchanged a glance with his partner. "About your height, wearing a dark hoodie, face not visible to the camera." Hope began to fuss, sensing Marcus's tension. He automatically shifted to a gentle rocking motion that quieted her. "Why are you really here?" Marcus asked, the question direct. Detective Hayes seemed to come to a decision. "The note found with the baby mentions someone who might hurt both the mother and child. We're investigating a series of domestic violence cases involving a man named Gabriel Torres. His girlfriend, Lucia Mendez, was admitted to Westlake Memorial 3 weeks ago with severe injuries. She was pregnant. The hospital records show she gave birth, but then both she and the baby disappeared." "You think Hope is her baby?" Marcus said, the pieces falling into place. "And that this Torres is the he mentioned in the note?" We think it's possible, Hayes confirmed. We're trying to locate Miss Mendez. She may be in danger. Marcus looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in his arms, unaware of the violence that may have surrounded her entry into the world. How can I help? The question seemed to surprise the detective. We need a DNA sample from the baby to confirm she's Lucia's child. And we need you to think carefully about anything you might have seen or heard that night. Any cars in the area, any people? Marcus nodded, his mind returning to that rainy night. There was a car, he said slowly, the memory surfacing. Dark-colored sedan, parked across the street when I went down to the alley. It was gone when I came back up with Hope. Officer Collins made notes while Hayes continued. Anything else? Any distinctive sounds, smells? Marcus closed his eyes, trying to recall details. Perfume, he said suddenly. When I picked up the box, I smelled perfume. Floral, but not too sweet. Like flowers after rain. Hayes nodded approvingly. Good. That's good, Mr. Reeves. As the officers prepared to leave, having collected a cheek swab from Hope for DNA testing, Hayes paused at the door. One more thing. We've been reviewing the security footage from nearby buildings for the night of the convenience store robbery 6 years ago. Interesting thing about digital archives. They sometimes contain files nobody bothered to check thoroughly the first time around. Marcus's heart stuttered in his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes justice is delayed, but not denied. Hayes handed Marcus his card. We'll be in touch about the baby situation. And ... Other matters. After they left, Marcus stood holding Hope, the detective's card clutched in his hand, afraid to hope yet unable to stop the feeling rising in his chest. That night, as Hope slept in her crib beside his bed, Marcus allowed himself to dream of a future he'd stopped believing was possible. A future where he was more than an ex-con, more than a man defined by a crime he didn't commit. A future with hope. 2 weeks passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and increasingly comfortable domesticity. Hope had gained weight, her face filling out, her dark eyes more alert and focused. She recognized Marcus now, her tiny face lighting up when he appeared above her crib each morning. Angela visited daily, often bringing supplies or staying to watch Hope during Marcus's work shifts. Their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect and shared concern for the baby who had unexpectedly brought them together. The foster family will be ready next week, Angela mentioned during one such visit, her tone carefully neutral. The Martinezes, good people, 3 other foster children, all older. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They both knew this had always been temporary, yet the thought of surrendering Hope to strangers, however kind, left a physical ache in his chest. There's something else, Angela continued, watching him closely. Detective Hayes called me this morning. They've located Lucia Mendez. Marcus looked up sharply. Is she okay? She's in protective custody. Torres has been arrested, not just for domestic violence, but for a string of robberies in the area. Angela paused, including potentially the convenience store 6 years ago. The world seemed to tilt beneath Marcus's feet. They think he committed the robbery I was convicted of? They're investigating that possibility. The DNA test confirmed that Hope is Lucia's daughter. Lucia admitted leaving her at your building because she saw you helping an elderly neighbor with groceries the day before. She said you looked strong but kind. Marcus remembered the encounter. A woman from the 2nd floor struggling with several bags. He'd barely thought about it. The kind of small interaction that had once been routine in his life before prison made him second-guess every human connection. Torres was pressuring her to get rid of the baby, Angela continued. When she refused, the abuse escalated. She managed to escape the night she left Hope, hoping Torres would assume she'd given the baby up for adoption. She's been hiding ever since. Will she want Hope back? Marcus asked, the question that had been haunting him since the police visit finally voiced. Angela's expression softened. She's not in a position to care for a child right now. She'll need extensive therapy, support services, possibly witness protection if Torres's case goes to trial. She's agreed to temporary surrender of parental rights while she recovers. Hope began to fuss in her crib, and Marcus automatically moved to lift her, his large hands now confident and gentle as they supported her head and body. There's a hearing scheduled for next Monday, Angela said, watching the ease with which Marcus settled the baby against his shoulder. Hayes wants you there. They're presenting new evidence in your case based on Torres's arrest and the security footage review. Marcus looked up, hope and disbelief warring in his expression. I think, Angela said carefully, that you should prepare yourself for all possibilities. But yes, I think there's a real chance your conviction could be overturned. The week that followed was the longest of Marcus's life, longer even than those first terrible weeks in prison. Hope seemed to sense his anxiety, becoming fussier than usual, demanding more attention, more comfort. Marcus gave it willingly, grateful for the distraction, for the way her needs anchored him to the present rather than the uncertain future. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. Marcus dressed carefully in the suit Angela had brought him. Donated by her brother, she'd explained. Slightly too big, but the best they could do on short notice. Hope wore a new outfit as well. A pale yellow dress with tiny flowers that Diane had brought on her last visit. "You don't have to bring her," Angela reminded him as they prepared to leave for the courthouse. "I could stay with her." Marcus shook his head. "She should be there. Whatever happens today, she's the reason for all of it." The courtroom was smaller than Marcus remembered, or perhaps it was that he entered it differently this time. Not in handcuffs and a jumpsuit, but in a suit carrying a baby who babbled happily, oblivious to the gravity of the proceedings. Detective Hayes nodded to him from near the front, where he sat beside a serious-looking woman in a tailored pantsuit, whom Angela identified as the district attorney. On the opposite side sat a public defender Marcus had never met, assigned to represent Torres. And there in the gallery, a small woman with haunted eyes and fading bruises on her face, Lucia Mendez, Hope's mother. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how their lives had become unexpectedly intertwined. When the judge entered, Marcus found himself holding Hope closer, as if she could shield him from whatever was to come. The proceedings moved quickly, legal terminology washing over Marcus in waves until the judge directly addressed him. "Mr. Reeves, please approach the bench." With Hope secure in his arms, Marcus moved forward, standing before the judge who had sentenced him 6 years earlier. "Mr. Reeves, this court has reviewed substantial new evidence in the case of your conviction for armed robbery. Security footage previously overlooked shows conclusively that at the time of the robbery, you were 3 blocks away at a bus stop. Furthermore, forensic evidence now links Gabriel Torres to the scene." The judge removed his glasses, his expression solemn. "It appears a grave miscarriage of justice has occurred." The words seemed to come from a great distance, their meaning too enormous to comprehend immediately. "This court hereby vacates your conviction, Mr. Reeves. The record will be expunged. The state of Illinois acknowledges this wrongful conviction and the years of freedom unjustly taken from you. Compensation proceedings will begin immediately." Hope chose that moment to reach up and pat Marcus's cheek, the simple gesture bringing him back to the present, to the reality of what had just occurred. He was free, truly free, not the conditional freedom of parole, but the complete restoration of his innocence in the eyes of the law. "Thank you, Your Honor," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "There is one more matter before this court today," the judge continued. "Regarding the infant, Hope Mendez. Miss Mendez has filed for temporary surrender of parental rights while she undergoes treatment and recovery. The court must decide on appropriate placement for the child." Marcus felt Angela's presence as she stepped up beside him, her hand lightly touching his elbow in support. "Given the unusual circumstances," the judge said, "and the recommendation of both Child Protective Services and the parole office, or rather Miss Waters, who no longer has jurisdiction over Mr. Reeves, this court is inclined to consider Mr. Reeves as a potential temporary guardian for the child, pending the usual background checks and home studies, which can now proceed without the barrier of a criminal record." Marcus looked down at Hope, then across to Lucia, who was watching them with tears streaming down her face. Slowly, deliberately, she nodded to him, a gesture of trust that transcended words. "Your Honor," Marcus said, finding his voice at last, "I would be honored to care for Hope for as long as necessary." The judge nodded, a hint of a smile softening his formal demeanor. "Very well. Temporary guardianship is granted to Marcus Reeves, with monthly reviews and continued support services. Miss Mendez will have visitation rights as determined appropriate by her treatment team." He brought down his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The next hour passed in a blur. Paperwork, congratulations, tearful thanks from Lucia, who held her daughter briefly before returning her to Marcus's arms with a whispered, "Take care of our girl." It was late afternoon when Marcus finally emerged from the courthouse, Hope sleeping peacefully against his chest, Angela beside him carrying the diaper bag. "What now?" she asked quietly as they stood in the fading sunlight. Marcus looked out at the city, the same city that had once imprisoned him, that had once seemed so hostile and unwelcoming, and felt for the first time in 6 years like he belonged. Now, he said, smiling down at the sleeping baby who had changed everything. "We go home." As they walked away from the courthouse, Marcus realized that the most unexpected rescue had not been his discovery of an abandoned baby, but rather Hope's discovery of him, a man who had lost faith in justice, in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. An ex-con had rescued an abandoned baby, never suspecting it would lead to his exoneration. But in the end, they had saved each other.